10. No partying. Chad Reed was arrested in October of 2020 for the horrible crime of murdering his tenants. Chad was a 53-year-old landlord who absolutely hated partying and loud music. Chad hated partying so much that when his two upstairs tenants refused to stop, he killed them. According to Michigan police, it started when Joseph Soule and Jacqueline Lapierre went missing on October 7th. Jacqueline's family helped organize a search party, but they came up empty-handed. It wasn't until later that the police found their bodies, and only because Chad showed up to the station and admitted to police what he'd done. Chad had stored the bodies of Joseph and Jacqueline inside his truck wrapped in plastic. His truck had been out in the open the whole time, parked right in front of the house they'd all lived in. According to what Chad told the police, the couple above him partied so frequently he barely got any sleep. Then, on October 7th, when he told them to quiet down, Joseph allegedly pulled a knife on him. So, Chad pulled out a gun and shot Joseph. And when Jacqueline tried to run, he killed her too. She made a run for it and managed to get into the backyard, where Chad ditched the gun and then beat and strangled her to death. As you can imagine, their families were devastated. Jacqueline's family described her as a sweet girl whose life was cut short for no reason. The only good news is that Chad will be in prison for the rest of his life. 9. The murderous Seattle landlord. In August of 2020, Michael Lee Dudley was charged with 2 counts of murder in connection to the horrible killings of Jessica Lewis and Austin Wenner. They were killed in June of that same year. The remains of the couple were discovered in bags on Alki Beach in West Seattle, as well as a few other locations. According to police, it wasn't that easy of a thing to pull off. The process of taking the bodies, chopping them into pieces, and then stuffing them into bags would have been a tremendous amount of work. Police say that dedication is proof of just how extremely dangerous Michael had been walking free in the community. Why did Michael kill these 2 completely innocent human beings? The police investigation revealed they'd been arguing about the rent. Michael was the landlord and he wasn't getting the money he wanted. On the night of the killing, a neighbor heard somebody begging for their life. Moments later, gunshots were fired. But here's the thing. When officers responded to the 911 call and knocked on the front door, nobody answered, so they left. They couldn't come back until they got a search warrant, which gave Michael enough time to dispose of the body parts in bags and suitcases throughout Seattle. One of the suitcases was even discovered by a couple of citizens who filmed opening it and then put the video on TikTok. 8. Burning down the house. It was the holiday season of 2020 when a house in Queens burned down with 3 people inside. The police were desperate to find out what happened, and the prime suspect was actually the landlord. A dog with the New York City Fire Department even found traces of an accelerant on gloves stashed in the landlord's vehicle. Police immediately seized the landlord's SUV, their computer and hard drive, but they weren't able to make an arrest because the evidence was circumstantial. 3 people were trapped inside the building as it burned, stuck in their apartments with no way to get past the flames. According to one man who narrowly escaped the apartment with his life, all of the tenants had been having issues with the landlord in recent weeks. This man hadn't wished to be named for safety reasons, but admitted to being a resident of the first floor. He was paying about $700 a month for rent, but he and at least a dozen other residents in the building had complained about the landlord, identified by the police as Eric Chen. Chen had been steadily trying to evict the tenants to clear out the building. At one point, he even turned off the utilities. Looking at this from the outside, or really from any angle at all, it's pretty clear Chen burned the building down to get rid of the tenants so he could sell the property. However, police were never able to prove it. They had the man who started the fire on tape, but the footage was too fuzzy. And even though they found traces of accelerant on gloves in Chen's vehicle, it wasn't enough to prove he'd started the fire. Everyone knows he did it, but there's no way to prove it. In the end, the landlord got away with a triple murder. 7. The cruel tenant. In 2021, a man was busted for being a real piece of human garbage. That's really the only nice thing anyone can say about the person who was keeping 20 dogs in despicable conditions inside of a Brooklyn apartment. His name was Ravon Service, and he was involved with a large group of people who were breeding dogs, keeping them in tiny cages of filth, and then selling them to make a few quick bucks. It was an absolutely atrocious operation. And eventually, when the landlord of the property, Kenisha Gilbert, found out what was going on, she stepped in to intervene. Not only were they evicted from the apartment, animal services also came in and rescued the dogs. This was on a Friday. Later that night, as Kenisha and her husband were returning home, the evicted tenant and his gang of animal abusers showed up outside her home and attacked them. Kenisha had just finished a 12-hour shift as a physician in New Jersey before the assault. All because she had done the right thing and kicked them out of the house where they were being cruel to animals. They brutalized her face to the point it was almost unrecognizable. They shattered her husband's ribs, and they did it all in front of their 2 young kids. Afterwards, Kenish and her husband were able to call the police, and everyone involved was arrested and charged with gang violence. 6. The sword-wielding tenant. Police responded to a 911 call on a Saturday morning in July of 2020. The landlord of a home in Connecticut was the one who called the police. His name was Victor King, and he was scared that his roommate Jerry Thompson might try to hurt him. Jerry was allegedly waving a sword around in a terrorizing manner and threatening to hurt Victor. According to Hartford detectives, it was all because of a rent dispute. That day, the police did not go to the house, despite receiving the 911 call from the man who was scared for his life. They only went to the home the next day, when several people called the police because they hadn't heard from Victor. His friends and neighbors were scared for his safety. When the police arrived on Sunday afternoon, they discovered a scene out of a horror movie. It turned out Victor had been right to worry about Jerry Thompson and his samurai sword. Jerry, who'd been renting a room from Victor in the same house, had decapitated him with the sword. Police found blood everywhere, as if Hellraiser had tortured somebody in the house. They also found Victor King's headless body. The cops were quick to track down Jerry Thompson, who was then formally charged with murder. They discovered the sword ditched about 10 miles, 16 kilometers from the house in the river. And while we don't know how much rent was owed by Thompson, friends of Victor King said he would never hurt the man. He was gentle, one of the good guys, and described as always a joy to be around. 5. Mistaken identity. In 2021, in Coral Springs, Florida, a man shot a real estate agent to death after he mistook her for the homeowner who just evicted him. It was a horrible case of mistaken identity that left one woman dead and Raymond Wesley Reese being charged with first-degree murder. Police arrived on the scene after getting reports of multiple gunshots. There, they discovered Sarah Michelle Trost dead in the driver's seat of her vehicle. One of the neighbors told police that Raymond had just been evicted and that he was extremely disgruntled by it. In the police investigation that followed, the cops figured out the same thing. Raymond had been so angry about getting kicked out of the house that he'd stalked the place and waited for the first person to show up so he could kill them. He assumed Sarah Michelle was the owner of the property, but she was just a real estate agent there to help with the listing of the property. Sarah Michelle's death means she's leaving behind a husband, a daughter, and her beloved pets. She owned and operated her own real estate brokerage in Coral Springs. She even spent her free time volunteering at an animal rescue and sanctuary. 4. Unpaid rent. Arnaldo Lozano Sanchez was sick and tired of his Las Vegas tenants being late with their rent. According to the prosecutors in his murder case, the elderly landlord decided he'd handle it his own way. The 78-year-old man went full Wild West on his struggling tenants, gunning all 3 of them down where they stood. 2 died and the 3rd was seriously wounded. Arnaldo is now facing 2 charges of murder and 1 charge of attempted murder. The old Las Vegas man was renting out 2 of the bedrooms in his single-family home. Several days before the shooting, his tenants hadn't given him the rent. He got really worked up about it and just stewed over it until he finally snapped. According to a man named Carlos, who was renting out one of the bedrooms in the house with his girlfriend, he saw the whole thing unfold. He heard the gunshots and looked into the hallway, where he saw Arnaldo with the gun in his hand. As he was shooting, he smiled and laughed. He didn't just kill these people for their unpaid rent, he did it because he enjoyed it. Carlos would lose his girlfriend that day. She sadly bled to death on the front lawn after being shot by the crazed landlord. Another woman was also killed, and a third victim managed to survive despite being shot 9 times at close range. 3. Pushed down the stairs. On January 12, 2020, Edgar Moncayo was pushed down the front steps of his home in Queens. It happened in the Corona neighborhood at about 2:30 in the afternoon on a Sunday in broad daylight. Edgar, who happened to be 71 years old at the time, had gone to his home that he owned to confront his tenant. His tenant, 22-year-old Alex Garces, had missed several rent payments. As you can imagine, Edgar wanted his money. But when Edgar knocked on the door, everything spiraled out of control. Alex pushed the old man so hard that he flew down the stairs and cracked his head on the concrete of the sidewalk. The terrifying incident was captured on a doorbell video, showing the violence and hate of the young man as he pushed the landlord to his death. Edgar suffered from what doctors called a traumatic brain injury. And according to ABC News, he died at the nearby hospital that same day. Because everything was captured on video, the tenant had no way to talk himself out of the situation. He was charged with first-degree manslaughter. 2. Heating issues. A landlord in Kansas stabbed his tenant over 30 times because the victim complained the house was too cold. According to court documents, Gordon Macbeth showed up to the property he was renting out on October 22, 2021. He was there to confront 28-year-old renter Daryl Gilland, who was living on the property with his girlfriend. The couple had texted Gordon because the heat had stopped working and they were freezing. But as soon as Gordon entered the house, he became aggressive. He started throwing things at Daryl's girlfriend. He became wildly and inappropriately agitated. Then he pulled out a huge hunting knife and stabbed Daryl repeatedly. His girlfriend, as horribly tragic as the whole situation was, used the brief moment in which her boyfriend was being murdered to scream and run out of the house. The girlfriend ran next door to a neighbor who grabbed his gun and ran back into Gordon's house to confront the insane landlord. But by then, Daryl was already dead. All the neighbor could do was hold the gun on Gordon and keep him there until the police showed up to make the arrest. 1. A free squatter. A house recently sold for $800,000 in a popular neighborhood of Virginia. It was a nice house with 5 bedrooms and roughly a century of history. Anyone would be lucky to live in such a shining example of colonial architecture. But the new owner of the property is in for quite the headache. The property was sold for nearly $1 million, despite the listing saying "as is only." The listing also warned potential buyers of a person or persons living in the lower level of the building with no lease. In other words, the building sold even though the owner was aware of squatters living in it. To be completely honest, the house isn't even that great. It needs renovations, it's rotting, nothing's up to code, and none of the appliances work. It also has 2 people living in the basement completely free of charge. One of them's been there for at least 3 years. The current owner decided the eviction process was too emotionally draining, and so they simply passed their unpaying basement tenants onto the new owner. Would you rather have to deal with an angry tenant or an unreasonable landlord? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Remember to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you again for another shocking video. Until next time, bye!